a waitress, an arrogant billionaire, and a grand piano. It seemed like nothing more than a cruel prank meant to humiliate a young woman. But no one expected that moment would silence the entire restaurant in stunned awe, and then every ounce of ego in the room was shattered by nothing but her pure, raw talent. Have you ever seen someone completely turn the tables just through passion alone? If not, the story below will surely give you something to think about. That Friday evening, a warm ambiance and the soft hum of conversations filled La Fontaine, a high-end restaurant in the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina. The gentle clinking of glasses, the rhythmic footsteps of servers, and the mellow jazz drifting from the piano in the corner all came together to create a scene of refined elegance and allure. In that picture was Deborah, a 25-year-old woman with eyes that always sparkled with something mysterious. She moved quietly between tables, tray in hand, her smile polite and warm. To the customers, Deborah was just another familiar face in a server's uniform, but beneath that modest exterior was an artist's soul, and a dream that burned with fierce intensity. Deborah wasn't born to be a waitress. Her true passion was music. Ever since she was a child, the piano had been her refuge, a place where she poured out her joy, her sorrow, even the things words couldn't express. That was her world. But dreams, sadly, don't pay the bills. To support herself and keep alive the hope of one day entering a prestigious music academy, Deborah worked at La Fontaine. Only a few close co-workers had ever heard her play during break times on the old piano tucked away in the back lounge, and they knew this girl wasn't just skilled, she had a profoundly musical soul. That night, just as the dinner rush began to ease, the restaurant doors opened. A man walked in, and the atmosphere instantly shifted. Leonard Grayson, a household name, legendary businessman, fabulously wealthy, and just as notoriously arrogant. Leonard entered like he owned the place. Sharp eyes, a smug smirk, flanked by a few well-dressed companions. Everyone knew he wasn't an easy customer. He was famous for mocking and provoking people just for amusement. The staff exchanged wary glances, quietly wondering, who's going to be the unlucky one tonight? But Deborah didn't care. To her, he was just another name on a long list of tables to serve. Fate, however, had something else in store. The moment Leonard sat down, he scanned the room and stopped when his eyes landed on Deborah. There was something odd in his look, followed by a sly smile that crept across his face. Deborah sensed the scrutiny but tried to ignore it and continued with her duties. Leonard, however, had other plans. In his mind, the night's entertainment had already been decided, and Deborah was at the center of it. Deborah was born and raised in a small town in South Carolina. Her mother, a single nurse, juggled 2 jobs to raise 3 kids. Despite their struggles, music was never absent from their home. Her mom often hummed classical tunes while washing dishes or lulling the kids to sleep. That's where Deborah's love for the piano was born. It became a part of her life. Do you believe true talent can transcend prejudice, wealth, or arrogance? Keep reading. What happens next will take your breath away. Deborah's home wasn't some luxurious mansion or sleek apartment. It was a modest little house where her mother carefully preserved old vinyl records and a slightly out-of-tune piano gifted by a neighbor. But from that simplicity, a love for music quietly blossomed. While other kids played outside, Deborah would sit quietly at that worn-out piano, teaching herself each note, each melody. She started by mimicking tunes from the radio, eventually discovering classical pieces from faded sheet music at a second-hand shop. Music wasn't just a hobby. It was her escape from reality. the one place she felt truly herself. Her talent didn't go unnoticed. She played at church, at school performances, and at community events, but no matter how loud the applause, the cold truth remained. Her family had no money, music scholarships never came, and her responsibilities at home only grew heavier. At 18, Deborah had to tuck her dream of the stage away into a quiet corner of her heart. Reality took its place. She needed to work. But even as she put her ambitions on pause, she could never abandon the piano, because to Deborah, the piano wasn't just a dream, it was her identity. When she moved to Raleigh a few years ago, Deborah applied to work at La Fontaine, not only because of the decent pay, but because of the grand piano sitting silently in the corner, elegant and still. She rarely had time to touch its keys, but just knowing it was there brought her peace. It felt like music had never truly left her. It was just waiting for its moment. On that fateful night, when Leonard and his group chose their table, Deborah approached with a tray of water, her stride poised like a seasoned stage performer used to the spotlight. Leonard ordered a top-shelf scotch and cracked a joke loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Deborah smiled politely, her voice steady as she noted the order, even as an uneasy energy radiated from the man before her. "Deborah, is it?" Leonard said, glancing quickly at her name tag. "Sounds like the name of someone with a lot of hidden talents." His words made her pause for a split second, but Deborah maintained her composure, nodded politely, and walked away from the table. She didn't notice the sly smile Leonard exchanged with the friend beside him, nor did she see his eyes following her every step. But Leonard wasn't merely watching. He was plotting, and soon Deborah would find herself at the center of a performance she never imagined she'd be the star of. The evening unfolded like any other. Laughter buzzed through the air, silverware clinked against plates, and quiet conversations filled the space. Deborah focused on staying steady, avoiding Leonard's gaze. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but this man felt different, less rude and more calculating. Cold, his presence cast a heavy shadow over her every movement. Once the appetizers were served, Leonard began his own performance, not with music, but with self-congratulatory stories. He rambled on about his successes, tossing in sarcastic jabs at those he claimed lacked ambition. His companions laughed boisterously, hollow and forced, while nearby diners began to show clear signs of discomfort. Have you ever met someone who belittled others' dreams just to boost their own ego? In the next few moments, you'll witness Deborah Dessart, the quiet waitress, turn that cruelty into a chance to let the world hear her soul speak. Deborah tried to keep her focus, but as she returned to Leonard's table with a bottle of wine, he suddenly spoke again. This time his words cut through the air. "Tell me something, Deborah." His voice rang out across the dining room as if it were his personal stage. "When you're not carrying trays, what do you do? A young woman like you must have some dreams, right?" The question made her freeze mid-step. Though no one spoke, she felt the weight of every gaze in the room settle on her. Deborah hesitated, then softly replied in a low, cautious voice, I play the piano sometimes." She hoped that answer would end the conversation. But Leonard's eyes lit up, his smirk widening, that look of someone who just thought of a new game. "Oh, a pianist. How fascinating. Why don't you give us a little performance?" Deborah stood frozen. The whole room seemed to pause, sound evaporating into silence, leaving only the thunder of her heartbeat. I don't think I can," she said quickly, forcing a weak smile. "I'm here to work tonight." But Leonard wasn't ready to let her go. "Nonsense," he bellowed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The piano's right there in the corner. Show us what you've got. Surely a future star isn't afraid of a few eyes?" His friends burst into laughter, loud and gleeful. Other diners turned to look, curiosity growing by the second. Deborah's chest tightened, her face flushed hot. She could feel the scrutiny, the invisible whispers of judgment from all corners of the room. She wanted to say no, to walk away, but the challenge hung in the air like a trap, waiting for her to either step into it or crumble in fear. "I really shouldn't," she stammered, scanning the room for a colleague to rescue her. But they stayed silent, hesitant. No one dared interfere with Léonard's spectacle. Leonard leaned back, took a slow sip of scotch, then sneered. "Ah, I see, all talk and no show, huh? What a letdown." That sentence, like a slap to her pride. Deborah wasn't a confrontational type, but the way he belittled her, turned her into a joke in front of everyone, stirred something deep within her. A voice echoed in her mind, her mother's voice. "Don't let anyone make you feel small, Deborah. You are more than they think." A long silence followed. Deborah looked at the piano, then turned back to Leonard, still lounging with that smug, triumphant grin. His face dared her. "Well, what can you do?" And then, defying her own hesitation, she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I'll play." The room seemed to tremble. Conversations ceased. Every eye followed Deborah as she walked toward the grand piano. Each step carried not just fear, but defiance. Against him, against herself, against every moment she'd been made to feel small. The light from the chandelier cast a soft halo over the piano, as if the stage had been waiting just for her. She sat down, gently placed her fingers on the smooth keys, her palms trembling slightly. Behind her, Leonard lounged back confidently, convinced he'd already won before the game had even begun. Deborah closed her eyes, just for a moment, to shut out the stares, the expectations, the noise, to find her breath again, to touch the part of her soul where music still quietly burned after all these years. She inhaled deeply, steadying her breath. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly in her chest she could barely hear anything else. This wasn't a church recital or a cozy community event. This was an arena, cold, demanding, and full of critical eyes. But there was no turning back now. She placed her hands on the keys. Cold and smooth, the familiar sensation made everything else fade away. The first notes rang out, fragile as a whisper, hesitant and flickering like her heart in that moment. A few guests shifted in their seats. Someone coughed softly at the back, but Deborah didn't notice. She was focused, immersed in every sound her fingers created. The piece she chose was Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy, a classical composition she had memorized note for note, breath for breath. The sound began to ripple through the room like fine threads weaving through the air. Soft, but filled with strength. And then something magical happened. As her confidence slowly returned, her hands began to glide across the keys with an elegance that seemed almost unreal, a stark contrast to the emotional storm raging inside her. Each note was like a confession, a tribute to her mother's years of silent sacrifice, the countless nights of practice in a cramped room, and a dream that once seemed long forgotten. The entire restaurant fell silent. The earlier chatter faded away. Only the piano's sound remained, floating like mist in the air. Even Leonard, the man who had mocked her, stopped whispering to his friends, his eyes now fixed on the young woman at the piano. Deborah didn't need to look up to know everything had changed. The smirks were gone, the disdainful stares vanished. What remained was something deeper, maybe awe, maybe remorse, or perhaps, for the first time, they truly saw her for who she was. And for the first time in a long while, Deborah was no longer just a waitress or a failed dreamer. She was an artist, a storyteller through sound. Each movement of her fingers poured out a piece of her soul, vivid, raw, and real. So much so that listeners felt like they could touch the emotion. As she played the final chords, the entire room held its breath. Not a single sound, only the lingering echo of the piano hung in the air, like the aftertaste of a dream too vivid to forget. Deborah stayed seated, her hands still resting on the keys, not yet ready to look up. Then, as if waking from a spell, the room erupted in applause. It rose to the ceiling, bouncing off every wall. Some diners stood clapping so passionately that tears welled in Deborah's eyes. Her co-workers, those who had witnessed her quietly practicing, joined in too, their faces beaming with pride. And Leonard? He remained seated. The smug smile that had clung to his face all evening was gone. Now he looked stunned, conflicted. Slowly he clapped, an empty sound, lost in the roar of true appreciation. But no matter how detached he tried to appear, nothing could dim what Deborah had just done. She had reclaimed her voice, through talent, through a truth no one could deny, and no mockery could take that away. As the applause began to fade, a collective breath seemed to pass through the room, not because the performance had ended, but because they had just witnessed something greater than they expected. Deborah stood slowly, her legs still shaking, but her back straight. For the first time that night, she truly saw the audience. Not just strangers watching her from a distance, but witnesses. Their eyes now held admiration, respect, and even a hint of wonder. She didn't look at Leonard right away. Instead, she gave a small nod to the diners who had clapped the loudest, a faint, serene smile touching her lips. She didn't feel proud, she felt relieved. Relieved that she hadn't let fear silence her true voice. But then, as if pulled by some invisible force, her gaze drifted toward Leonard. He was still seated, hands clasped on the table. The arrogant expression he had worn all night had vanished. In its place was a stiff, uneasy look, as if he was caught between admitting he was wrong or clinging to his pride. "Well," Leonard finally spoke, his voice deliberately loud, like he wanted to break the silence that had just been created. "That was unexpected." He gave a small, dry laugh, lacking the usual confidence. Seems real talent comes from places no one expects. The words dropped into the room like dead weight. His friends exchanged unsure glances, uncertain whether to laugh along or stay quiet. Deborah tilted her head slightly, as if studying something unfamiliar. On the surface, it sounded like a compliment, but it was hollow. It lacked sincerity, lacked the courage to simply say, "I was wrong." "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm and steady. There was no warmth, but no anger either. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to win with words. What she had just shared, her honest, unfiltered music, had spoken louder than anything else. Leonard cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable under the weight of the room's stares. He motioned for another drink, as if hoping the alcohol might erase what had just happened. "You truly have a gift," he muttered, this time more quietly, with a tone that hinted at reluctant acknowledgement. Deborah gave a slight nod, her gaze unwavering. "Everyone has a gift," she said, each word slow and deliberate. "What matters is how you choose to use it." Her words cut through the room like a fine blade, not loud or dramatic, but sharp enough to shift the atmosphere. Another breathless silence passed. Then quietly, the room seemed to nod with her, as if they understood what she meant. Leonard began shifting in his seat, his once dominant presence fading. The power he had wielded over the room was slipping away with every passing second. The diners returned to their meals, but the atmosphere had changed. What was once a space of elegant, artificial calm now felt warmer, infused with something real, understanding, and perhaps respect, for the young waitress who had made an entire room stop and truly listen. And Leonard, he hadn't just been embarrassed, he had been exposed, and no excuse could cover that up now. No charm, no glamour could mask the truth everyone in that room had just witnessed. Deborah stepped away from the piano, her breath still shaky, but her heart clear. That moment, the silence, the applause, the eyes of strangers, settled in her chest like something rare and precious. Her co-workers welcomed her back to the service station with quiet smiles and knowing nods. No words needed, everyone understood she had just done something extraordinary. Work remained, and her shift wasn't over, but something had shifted in the way she moved. Her head held higher, her steps light but firm. Her confidence wasn't pride. It was the steady calm of someone who had reclaimed herself. Leonard's table, once loud and smug, had gone still. The people who once laughed at her now avoided her gaze. No more boasting, no more arrogance, just an awkward, uneasy silence. Deborah resumed her duties, refilling water, clearing plates, but each action now carried a different weight. She wasn't just a restaurant employee. She was someone who had reminded an entire room of the power of truth and authenticity. An older woman gently touched her hand as Deborah set down a coffee cup. "You were wonderful," the woman whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I've never heard anything that moved me like that." A man nearby added, "You have something rare. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt that." Deborah bowed her head in gratitude, her heart swelling with thankfulness. Those words, more than praise, were validation. For the years of quiet perseverance, for a dream she had never truly let go of, no matter how many times it was buried. Leonard, unlike the other guests, still hadn't come to terms with what had happened. When Deborah brought the bill to his table, his eyes met hers. Part resentment, part reluctant acceptance. "You made your point," he said curtly. "No need to keep making a show of it." Deborah paused, looked him straight in the eyes, not with anger, just calm clarity. "I was never trying to prove anything to you," she said, voice soft but unwavering. "I just wanted to play." Leonard said nothing. He turned his glass in his hands, visibly uncomfortable. Whatever power he once held had faded into a pale shadow. He signed the check in silence. One of his friends, younger and more sincere than the others, turned to Deborah and said, "You were really incredible." That made her pause. For the first time that night, she saw a flicker of humanity in someone she had assumed was empty. "Thank you," she replied with a small smile, then walked away, without looking back. The night ended in an odd, hushed stillness. Leonard's group left the restaurant quietly, no bravado, no swagger, just a quiet retreat. Deborah stood there, not feeling victorious, not bitter. She wasn't thinking about Leonard anymore. Her mind was already somewhere ahead, on what comes next. That night's tips were unusually generous, enough to cover rent, with a little left over for the piano lessons she'd been postponing for months. As the restaurant doors closed behind her, Deborah stepped into the night with a lightness in her stride. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing. Tonight she had been fully herself, and that was enough to start again. From a single note, a new song, a dream that had never truly died. As she walked home in the cool night breeze, Deborah took a deep breath, her chest expanding with a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time: certainty. She wasn't just a waitress, she wasn't just a dreamer, she was an artist. And nothing, not mockery, not money struggles, not fear, could take that from her. But tonight, Deborah wasn't dwelling on the conflicts of earlier. Her mind was already in the future, where the dream no longer felt distant but was beginning to emerge like light through the fog. She sat down on the worn stool in her small apartment, placed her fingers on the keys of her old upright piano. The sound that came out couldn't compare to the grand piano at La Fontaine, but that didn't matter. The music still came from the deepest part of her, the place where the heart speaks. That night, something in Deborah changed. It wasn't just a moment of triumph. It was an awakening. She no longer needed to hide her talent. No need to explain it. It was hers, and that was enough. In the days that followed, the story from the restaurant quickly spread. The guests who had witnessed the performance began sharing it, and the rumor grew like a slow-burning flame. Then, one day, Deborah received an unexpected phone call from a music producer in Nashville who had happened to be there that night. He didn't promise fame or fortune, but he offered her the chance to record her first demo, a door opening to a future she had only dared to imagine in silence. Deborah said yes, not because she believed it would change her life overnight, but because for the first time she felt ready to walk through that door. For years, fear had whispered in her ear, "You're not good enough, the dream is too far away." But now she saw the truth. Resilience and authenticity were her greatest strengths. Her encounter with Leonard Grayson wasn't just a moment of humiliation turned triumph. It was a test and a powerful lesson in integrity. Leonard, no matter how wealthy or influential, could not take away her true identity. He was the embodiment of every doubting voice she had faced in her life, and Deborah had silenced them all, not with anger, but with the purity of her music. If you're listening to this story, Deborah's message is clear. Don't let others define your worth. There are many Leonard Graysons in the world, people who project their own insecurities onto others just to feel powerful. But true power lies in staying true to yourself, in daring to live your passion, even in the face of ridicule. Deborah closed the piano lid, resting her hand on the worn wood. She smiled. Her journey was far from over. But now, she knew it had truly begun. And what about you? What dream have you been holding back from out of fear or doubt? Don't wait for someone like Leonard to come along and test you. Step forward, right now. If Deborah's story touched you, follow this channel to hear more stories of courage, resilience, and rising above. Who knows, the next story might be yours.